the most important thing we can do, and this is really going to touch on like how to strengthen your self-identity. You can apply these to things like identity crises. The most important thing we can do when we're strengthening our self-identity is get a really clear picture of who we are in this moment and to check in with that and allow room for that to change long-term. So what does that actually mean? What I find is that some individuals have a really strong ego. And ego being like the personality, the mind, and sometimes it's very beneficial and actually really important for all people, honestly, to work on like unraveling some of the parts of the ego, because a lot of them are just really painful coping mechanisms and old behavioral patterns. So for example, let's pretend that we have Bob, and maybe Bob has a coping mechanism where he's like, people, nobody looks out for me. Nobody hands anything down to me. So I have to take a lot from the world because nobody's going to give me anything. But then maybe that coping mechanism based on that perception he developed makes him sort of like a selfish person and a big taker and greedy and these different things. And in that case, he wants to like weaken that part of his identity. He wants to unravel that harmful or painful coping mechanism that could be imbalanced, right? That could be, I'm too greedy, instead of being able to have healthy give and receive, healthy exchange. So whenever we have character traits that are out of balance, that are extremes, they're based on coping mechanisms, they're responses to trauma or pain, we usually have to do some work at like weakening those things. But something that's really interesting about fearful avoidance and sometimes anxious preoccupied individuals as well is that part of your coping or adaptation to pain can be to basically keep your identity so small and so weak and so not taking up space that then you think you're going to receive love or connection, that's the way. And so from that perspective, because really what we're always seeking is balance, homeostasis, equilibrium, from that perspective, we usually have to move in the opposite direction. We have to strengthen the ego. We have to get stronger in our self-identity, but not in a coping mechanism way, not in a like, I haven't had boundaries, now I'm going to set boundaries with everybody and nobody. I'm not going to share anything with anybody again. The idea is not for the pendulum to swing to the extreme opposing direction. The idea is to define and develop a sense of self and a vision that is in accordance to that. So you know what your yeses and nos are, and you can get clear. So there's ways that we can break this down. Number one, it is very important to get clear about your personality needs. If you haven't done that course yet and you find that you are struggling with like boundaries or a sense of self-identity, it's often because you don't know what you need on a regular basis. So it's really hard to know what your yeses and nos are when you don't know like what your needs are. So remember when, somebody asked me, thank you for asking that question earlier, about myself and burnout and things like that. And I was saying, well, I'm really clear on my personality needs and I make sure the buckets are filled. Let's say, for example, that I'm knowing that, for me, spiritual growth is important as well as personal growth. So I do a lot of like meditation, just studying of different like philosophies and different things. And it's very like enlightening for me. And I really enjoy that and it fills my cup. And so let's say that I'm, busy and like, the career, personal growth, emotional connection are really filled, but maybe that like time alone to learn or meditate isn't filled enough. And then I have a friend who says, hey, let's meet and catch up and do something together. I can pause and I can go, emotional connection's pretty filled right now, but, spiritual time is not very filled. And so now to say yes to this would create further depletion over here. And then I'm just going to feel depleted or off balance, because really when our personality needs are fulfilled, the mind becomes more still and we feel more naturally balanced. And so from that perspective, if I didn't know that those are my needs in the first place and somebody calls and says, hey, I'm in your area, let's spend time together, I could be on a trajectory towards burnout. Burnout is not, just on a side note here, let's just pause this. Huge topic, but burnout, when we think of burnout, or when we think of like we're tired, it's usually not that you're tired because like sometimes people are sitting at a desk all day and they're exhausted at the end of the day, but they're not even physically moving. So what are they tired from? People, when they're tired or depleted, are usually not depleted from things or because they're doing things. That can be the case. Obviously, if you're like on your feet all day running around, you can be physically tired, but usually people's fatigue and exhaustion is actually about how unfulfilled they feel and how much their needs are unmet. And because the brain produces emotional response is to let you know when needs are unmet. In the background, you have all of these negative feelings, even if they're just quiet, 3 or 4 out of 10 negative feelings, creating these like cortisol or stress responses throughout the day, and negative internal dialogue as a result, which then produces more negative feelings, more norepinephrine, more cortisol responses. And that's actually what's exhausting or depleting you and your nervous system. So it's less like that you're tired, like sitting at the desk all day in a career that you're not fulfilled about or around, that you really don't like. That can be way more exhausting than working 10, 12 hours doing something you love, even if it's on your feet or whatever it might be, because you're fulfilled in those areas. You feel inspired, empowered, and your neurochemistry, because of those feelings, is going to be different, right? So sorry, I went on a tangent there, but the point here is that if we get clear on our personality needs, we know better what our yeses and nos are. And then the next step or extension of that is to get really clear on what our boundaries are in the 7 areas of life, what things and be intentional and have a framework or a blueprint ahead of time that says, you know what, these are my feeling boundaries. I notice that I often take on people's feelings, and here's what I'm going to do instead. Here's a fair way of doing this. Tell somebody that I love them, I'm here for them if they want to express a need to me, but I'm not going to ruminate all day about what everybody's feeling around me and try to fix it in my head when they didn't ask for help, right? So that could be a boundary, just as an example. So when we can get clear on our time boundaries, our feeling or emotional boundaries, our thought boundaries, how much we think about things, what our opinions and beliefs are, and get clear about those sorts of things, our material boundaries, our physical boundaries, and our sexual boundaries. And these are all in the boundaries course, by the way. If we can get clear on this, and we can get clear on our personality needs, and then we can get tuned in, tapped into what we feel and need in real time when we're around other people by doing feeling and needs awareness work, like journaling, which is in all of the intro to attachment style courses. If we can do those 3 core things, and then if we can add this extra layer to it long-term, those 3 core things are like the core. And then if we can add this extra layer to it long-term, where we develop a vision for our lives, and it doesn't have to be this like, it all has to go exactly by this vision, but just a general idea of like what we're moving towards. Now we can get really clear about our yeses and our nos. And now we have a strong sense of self-identity. We know our boundaries, know what we want. We know what we're feeling and needing. We know what we're moving towards. And now yeses and nos become quite easy and simplified. And we don't have to feel guilt around saying no to the friend who asks you to spend some time together or hang out, because you know who you are, what you want. And it's not coming from a malicious place. There's no room to make self-judgment, because you know, oh, this is because it's off track to what my plans are, or I'm feeling out of balance. My personality needs are not met. So I got to take a pause, replenish myself so I can show up as the best version of myself possible. And so by operating from that space, you are going to have the most harmonious relationships. You don't have to feel guilty about saying yes and no, and clarity becomes a really key foundational part of your life. So I hope this makes sense, because this is really important. So I'm going to answer some more questions for a little bit, and then we'll touch on a few last key features. So, and just on a side note, let's say you're here and you're like, oh my gosh, I really need this course. I recognize that I do have a bit of a weak sense of self-identity, and I can be bad with my boundaries, and I can have like sort of these behaviors popping up. Here's my recommendation once you have this awareness in mind. Start by doing feelings, and start by doing your personality needs, by doing the needs course, and get clear on your personality needs and like what makes you feel replenished, balanced, fulfilled. That's what fulfillment is. It's like fulfillment is like the expression, the act of your needs being met, so that all the things that are important to you feel like the buckets are filled. That's when we feel fulfilled. So if you can get clear on that, and then you can take that information, you can also go, okay, and what are my feelings and needs generally in real time? And let me track that for a week or two. Let me journal in the evenings, what I felt throughout the day, what I needed, and let me start trying to harvest that so that I can know in real time, ooh, I'm in a conversation where people are gossiping and I'm starting to feel uncomfortable. And I know that I don't really like participating in that. It doesn't really make me feel inspired or empowered or good. And it's not an alignment of my needs of like deep emotional connection. It actually feels like it's violating it. Okay, so what do I need right now? Well, I don't want to offend anybody, but I don't want to be here any longer. So I'm just going to excuse myself and say I'm going to grab a glass of water. I don't need to say, hey, everybody stop gossiping. Stop it right now. You might want to do that. That could be something you do need, but I'm just giving you examples in theory, right? So you tune in, you see what you need, you check in, and then you go do, and you've met your own needs, and you feel like, okay, we're good. I have created relief. So the goal is to get your personality needs down, get in touch with what you're feeling and needing in real time, and then go into the boundaries. And how do I, now that I know myself, have spaces to sort of protect myself, my feelings and needs, right? And once I've done that, then what I can do is, now I've got this clarity of the boundaries I want to have, who I am, and now I can do the mindset mastery and life mapping course and map out this like vision or direction that I want to move my life towards. And now it's really easy. It becomes really simplified at this point to be clear about my yeses and nos, and to communicate and share myself and express myself and get seen and heard, because I'm really clear on who I am. And so that's like the order that I would go about this in, if this is something that you're really finding to be of the utmost importance. Here's something, just in full transparency, it is very common, and I'm not saying this like against any fearful avoidance. I've seen very often that fearful avoidants go, oh my gosh, I am so frustrated with this person. They could even be a secure person. They do not meet my needs. And then suddenly they start self-reflecting, and it's like, oh my gosh, I wasn't expressing my needs at all in the relationship. And I was getting mad that this person couldn't like read my mind essentially and meet my needs accordingly. And wow, that's a big piece for me to sort of swallow and look at and realize, okay, I have to show up and start communicating my needs and seeing them through and being very consistent about my communication over time. And that's how we're actually getting ourselves seen and heard and understood. And I've said this before, but one of the biggest things that I see when people are feeling unseen, unheard, misunderstood is they haven't carved out space for themselves in the world. They haven't said, this is who I am. This is how I want to be treated, through all their little interactions of telling people, hey, I know you don't mean anything by it, but that didn't really feel good when you said that to me a moment ago. I'd rather you communicate to me this way. Or, hey, you know what? When you forgot to do that thing the other day, I really need you to do this instead. And until we communicate and show who we are through expressing our needs, through expressing our boundaries consistently over time, we're not going to feel seen and heard and understood, because we're not allowing ourselves to have a space in the world to be that way. And so it's so important to be able to do that.